Hello, Lalanath. Good to connect up with you after a long time. Huh?
Indeed. Nice to see you, Rohan.
Where are you right now? Are you in US, Washington?
I am in Washington, yes.
Right. I'm actually in London, at Ideal Island Studios here in London. Understand you're going down to Sri Lanka for a show. What is it?
Yes, I'm planning to be in Sri Lanka in next month in June because I have a concert coming on in which one of my symphonies, the second symphony called the Sigiri Symphony, is being performed.
Right.
June, so I hope to go, in the early part of June and attend the rehearsals of the orchestra and then wait for the concert and come back.
Right. So when are you hoping you are going to spend some time in Colombo first before the 14th of June?
Right. So I will spend, the early part of June I'll spend with the orchestra, of course.
Right.
It's being conducted by a young conductor who's really very good. His name is Sri Lankan-American. Sure, they're performing this concert, as I said, on the 14th of June at 7 o'clock in the Lionel Wendt. And so I will spend that first half of, June with the orchestra, listening to rehearsals, giving feedback and all that. And then after the concert, maybe I'll, travel around a little bit in the country and spend some time outside of Colombo.
Right. That's wonderful, because send us the link. We'll put the link on this recording here so that anyone in Sri Lanka will be able to access the information and book the tickets, etc.
Absolutely. So, just for everyone's information, so this concert has two big pieces with an interval in the middle. The other piece, apart from my symphony, is Beethoven's Piano Concerto, which is a piece of music written with the piano as a soloist, accompanied by the orchestra, if you like. And the solo pianist is a gentleman by the name of Louis Pereira, also a Sri Lankan, but he lives internationally and travels internationally. So he's one of these leading pianists, Sri Lankan pianists. And the other half of the concert will be the symphony. The symphony is actually in three parts or three movements, and each movement depicts one of the aspects of the drama that took place around Sigiri, the rock fortress, 5th century AD. The first one is called The Rise of the Parvata Raja, which is really the rise of King Kashyapa I, because he edified himself as a god king, taking the concept of god Kuera, the god of wealth, from the Persian culture, and built himself up, built this fortress on the rock, imported cherry blossom trees, grew them on the top so that when they were in flower, it looks like the palace is in the clouds, like god Kuera's, palace in the mountains. And then he built these pleasure gardens and so on. And 16 years was his rule. Not a very long period to rule, but during that 16 years, there was a lot of trade and economic development in the country. The excavations are showing that there were Roman and even Chinese and Arabic coins unearthed in and around Sigiri, which shows that there was a lot of trade. Sri Lanka was on the sea silk route. And this king, believed in accumulating wealth and allowing people to develop economically. But then he was deposed by his younger stepbrother, Moggallana, who raised an army in India, came back and defeated him in battle. And he apparently committed suicide. Kashyapa said to have committed suicide, and Moggallana then returned the country to the old civilizational concepts of what is called the Dharma Raja, based on Buddhist principles, the tank, the Dagaba, the agriculture, and all of that. So it was really a 16-year period in which there was a struggle between two competing philosophies. So the second movement is called Scenes at Sigiri. So you have these beautiful paintings of the Apsaras and the pleasure gardens. There must have been a lot of dancing and partying, if you like, and performances. Apparently, Kashyapa was given to literature and poetry and art. So we have some dancers, etc., in the middle of the second movement, and then the last movement is called The Fall, where you hear the runner-bearer or Moggallana's return of war drums, and then again you have a battle, and then finally the Dharmaraja theme. Each of these ideas are represented by a theme, comes out victorious. But what's really important in the symphony is at the end, the symphony ends with a baritone soloist, a singer, singing singing the lyrics, or we call it a libretto, written by Gamini Wijetunga, who's a well-known lyricist in Sri Lanka. He took what is called the mirror wall poetry. There is a wall which protects people as they climb up, and this is called the mirror wall because the plaster has been mixed with egg white, and it's like a mirror. But down the ages, visitors who came to Sigiri to see this wonder scribbled poetry on this wall in different languages, in Chinese, in Arabic, in Sinhalese, in Sanskrit. And so what you really have is Gamini Wijetunga taking some of those poetry and rewriting them in modern Sinhalese, and I have set that to music, and it is sung with the orchestra as part of that last movement of the symphony. So this is, if you like, a quick explanation of the Sigiri Symphony.
Wonderful. So it's basically a narration of the rise, the rule, and the fall of Kashyapa of Sigiri.
Yeah. Correctly, and more so to do with the competing philosophies rather than the actual story itself, and so on, and the dancing and so on. But apart from that, it's really the clash between these two philosophies. Each of these philosophies are represented by two separate themes, which you can definitely identify. And so they are brought together, they fight with each other musically, of course. And so that's the symphony.
Excellent. So just reminding our viewers and listeners, mainly in Sri Lanka, for this event, it's on the 14th of June, is it? The Lionel Wendt. So you can book tickets and all that online.
Indeed. There's also a phone number you can call and get your tickets. I will send you the link.
I would be very pleased to put that on this podcast at the bottom of the description. Lalanath, so you will be finishing off on the 14th your musical activity, and then how long are you going to stay in Sri Lanka for?
Maybe another week to 10 days, but then my plan is to try to travel around a little bit, maybe into some of the national parks, and visit the tea country, and I'll of course stay in some nice maybe hotels, or visit these places. So that's my plan.
Right. I see. So talking of your visit, be careful, or be aware rather, not beware, but be aware that there are certain hotels that are only open to foreigners. Perhaps you could masquerade as a foreigner, or would they detect that you're a Sri Lankan? I was just trying to highlight this, Lalanath, because I think there was a social media article by Dr. Gamini Edirisinghe about his experience at Rothschild Tea Center, based on his article, that he experienced together with his wife, that they were not allowed in because they were locals, or the event, the tea factory tour, was open to foreigners only. There are a number of people, myself included, in other areas where you go, you're told it's a boutique hotel or a private hotel, and people from outside are not welcome. But I suppose if I was of a different color skin, the paler version, one would be most welcome. Have you had that sort of experiences before, or is this you're going to see how it goes?
Unfortunately, yes, Rohan. I've experienced what I would call racial discrimination against Sri Lankans. This is really, really sad to see this in our country, because it is almost like a kind of mini apartheid.
In your own country, Sri Lanka.
You had apartheid in South Africa, where the white minority was ruling and governing the country by force, of course, and the African majority was suppressed and oppressed. And they had these laws which essentially said, you had separate toilets for white people, separate toilets for black people. It was so also in the United States before Abraham Lincoln set the slave free, and a long time even after Abraham Lincoln, with what are called the Jim Crow laws, even in the South, in places like, Tennessee, Louisiana, etc., in the southern states, you had separate toilets and separate restaurants and separate schools for the white people and the non-white people. And so that's what you call kind of an apartheid regime, and it's very discriminatory. And so to find that happening in Sri Lanka is extremely sad, particularly because it's against our own people. And I have experienced that, not recently, but I have experienced that, a few years ago as well. And I can tell you about those two stories that I can recite. But this is not lawful, by the way. It is not legal to do that.
Yeah. So before we come to the legality and what we can do as society and what the government can do, perhaps it would be nice, not nice, but sad to hear, but in the interest of the program, would be nice to hear the experiences or the bad experiences you underwent.
Yeah, so one of my experiences was when I went for a conference to one of the leading 5-star hotels in Colombo. I don't want to name the hotel, but I'm just saying that it's a 5-star hotel. And I had my briefcase with me with my papers inside, and I was, and at that time, I don't know whether they have it still, but there was this security, scanner you had to go through. And then you leave your bag, and then you can open it, and they would look into it, and then you pass. So we were standing in a line, and in front of me was a white gentleman, obviously either a tourist or a visiting professional. He also had a briefcase with him. And as he came up to the security officer, he said, "That's fine, sir, you can go." And he passed through without his bag being opened or anything. He happily went on his way. And I was the next person. But when I came up, I was told to put my bag and to open it up. So then I stopped and I said, "Why is it that you did not ask that gentleman in front to do what you're asking me to do?" And he couldn't quite answer that question. He kind of mumbled something, and I said, "I'm sorry, unless you're going to call that gentleman back and open his bag and check it just like you're doing in mine, I'm not going to open my bag. I need treated equally." Then he said, no, I have to open my bag. I said, "Call your supervisor." And so said, now the entire line is held up in the meantime.
Behind you.
So then he called somebody else who was, of course, a gentleman in a tie and so on, who came up, and then I explained to him the situation. And he said, he apologized to me, and of course, he let me go. He didn't open my bag, which is also very bad, because the whole purpose of security is you check, you could be of any color. But that's one incident where I felt I was discriminated, and the person who was the tourist was somehow treated differently. A second incident actually happened when we went to visit Sigiri with my daughter and my wife and my other daughter. My wife and other daughter have U.S. passports. My daughter, and we are a merged family. So my daughter and myself, we were on Sri Lankan passports. But my daughter had only lived in Sri Lanka like for a year or two as an infant. She grew up in the United States and in Switzerland, where I was serving, doing a job. So she doesn't speak Sinhalese. So we came up to the gate. We bought our tickets. We bought separately, had to pay higher price for my daughter. And then for my other daughter and myself, we bought the Sri Lankan rate. Then when we came up to the gate where you enter the actual pleasure gardens, my wife and other daughter with their US ticket were allowed in. And when I went with my daughter, they realized that we were one family.
Yeah. And
they just wouldn't believe that my daughter was not a US citizen. And they asked me, "Is she a Sri Lankan citizen?" I said, "Yes, I'm also a Sri Lankan citizen." But then they said, no, you must be. And then they referred me to a separate place where I had to go. And those two ladies behind the counter started speaking to my daughter in Sinhalese and asking her questions about, if you are Sri Lankan and in Sinhala.
Yes.
She doesn't understand English, so she was looking askance. And then they concluded from this that she was not Sri Lankan. Thankfully for me, I had her citizenship certificate on my phone, so I opened it up and I showed it to them. At which point, of course, we were let go. So essentially, this kind of situation, makes you wonder about discriminatory treatment. Now, there may be Sri Lankans who have dual citizenship or have taken foreign citizenship who may be cheating the system and trying to go in on a Sri Lankan thing. But that's another whole story about whether the government is entitled to charge, dual fees is another question, which, by the way, I challenged in court and actually had a settlement, which I can talk about later. But
so I'll just narrate something that didn't happen to me, but to somebody who is a group of relations at Sigiri. The other side of the coin to what you explained, Lalanath. Basically, this family, they are Sri Lankans, and a family of 5. That's the father, mother, and the 3 children. The 3 children were at that time educated throughout at Colombo International School, CIS Colombo. And for whatever reason, their accents are different to the rest of the Sri Lankan accents. And their knowledge of spoken Sinhala was not as good as what I call a native speaker, even though they were natives, if we can talk in that sort of black and white language. So they went to Sigiri. They bought 5 local tickets. And of course, the children were speaking, I would say, jabbering away in a accent-related English, which was not common to the majority of the Sri Lankans. So they had the same issue that you underwent. The 1 or 2 women in the interrogation counter spoke to them in Sinhalese, which they were able to answer with heavy accents. Despite, unlike your daughter who wasn't able to, but despite being able to respond in an accented Sinhala, they concluded that these 2, the whole family were non-Sri Lankans, even though they were Sri Lankans from their appearance, and everything else was Sri Lankan. Now, this led to, at that time, this is about, before COVID, the mother of the children who was with them, she wasn't going to stand for it, so she was going to have a confrontation verbal. She didn't succeed, and then she actually had to ring a particular cabinet minister. Now, this is Sri Lanka, this is the problem, who happened to know them on a family basis, personal basis. So she rang him, and then he spoke to these people and said in absolutely good Sinhalese, which we can't even say it in Sinhalese on this program, that these are Sri Lankans. If you don't let them in, I will get someone else to come and meet you there. I mean, that was also high-handed, to be very fair, but that's ground reality. Of course, at that point in time, it's like the Stockholm Syndrome. They get very friendly with you and tell you in Sinhalese that it's because of the odd people who come, Sri Lankans trying to cheat the system. Maybe that happens, maybe it happens. But like the tea center incident that Dr. Gamini Edirisinghe and his wife went through, right? Maybe there are unruly people, but that's a matter for the security. Like in any country, if you sort of go drunk or something into some public place, they won't let you in. It happens in other countries as well, where it doesn't matter whether you're black, white, or brown. You see? So, what can, as society, we can protest and let them know. But in addition to that, what can the people do, or what can the government do to let this not happen? Because at the present moment, as you know, there are Russians, Ukrainians, Israelis having various trades and businesses in the coastline round the country, and some hotels, you're no longer welcome. Yeah, so when you were in Sri Lanka as a lawyer, you had sort of gone to the higher courts to seek redress, etc. Can you explain, Lalanath, what one could do in such a situation?
So, of course, for the lay citizen, when you enter a place and you are discriminated against, you want a quick solution. You're not going to, your interest is not in saying, okay, go to the police station, file a complaint, go to find a lawyer, go to court. It's going to take you days, months, maybe even years before you get relief. So that's not what the ordinary citizen is looking for. As I said, this lady who was confronted in Sigiri, she called the minister, and you want a quick solution. And in my case, thankfully, I had the citizenship certificate on my phone, so I was able to show it and get quick relief. But in other cases, you don't have a solution like that at hand, particularly for the common Sri Lankan person. May not know a minister, may not have the documents on hand. In those situations, then you suffer. You suffer because you will not get relief immediately. So I think the first thing to realize here is that there is a legal structure which prohibits this kind of behavior. That's the first thing to understand. And we can go through that, and I can explain that, and then I can also explain the different cases and the situation. There are a few other situations I can explain that I've been through, have been remedied even without going to court. And but in many cases, you have to try to argue the case then and there, and if it fails, of course, you can try to call the police. As to whether the police will be helpful in that situation, there is no guarantee, but that is one of the things that you can certainly do.
So it's lack of understanding on the part of the people at various places, and also in the private sector, as I said, the tourists who have set up businesses illegally as well as legally, both, they have a foreigners only policy which is totally discriminatory. So I can understand at Sigiri there is not a lot you can do other than to argue your own case on the spot and then see if it works. But if one is shut out, segregated, or not allowed in at a restaurant or a hotel open to the public, then I think that institution won't go away by tomorrow morning or whatever. It will be there for a while. So is a complaint to the police the first port of call, Lalanath? How do you see it?
So the complaint to the police is mostly for record purposes, that the incident actually happened. You're making a contemporaneous and a truthful, statement to a government officer who will then take it down, and then you can sign it, and and they might carry out some investigations. There'll be some record of the incident, which could be helpful in a later proceeding. And so that's the main reason why you're going to the police. Maybe the police will intervene on your behalf, because they can intervene, but sometimes they may not, because they have so many other things to be doing. But I think it might be helpful for our listeners and viewers to know what the actual state of the law on this matter is. And the first thing I want to say...
Sorry to interrupt, Lalanath. Before you get to the stages in the law, I've also seen in Pedlar Street in Galle some videos been circulated where some local Sri Lankans were refused entry to a shop in Galle Fort, that is Pedlar Street. Those people, the people who were the victims, had actually videoed and photographed the incident as evidence. So maybe that's something that...
So if you don't want to go to the police, you can, video evidence is really very good. So you can video what is happening. The moment people start refusing, you can immediately take your phone and start recording it. Of course, if you are within a private premises, they can ask you to stop recording, because they have the right to tell you not to record. But if you're in a public place like a street or the Sigiri, Sigiri is a public place. It's run by the government. Any place that's run by the government, you should be entitled to record the conduct of public officers, because that is your right to access information and to be able to present it. So I think video vigilance, as I call it, is one of the things that we can do as citizens in holding our public officers, in particular public officers, accountable. So with that, I think it might be useful, as I said, for viewers to know that this is a matter that is actually covered not just by ordinary law, but by our constitution itself, by the Constitution of Sri Lanka, the 1978 Constitution, which is the supreme law of the country. The highest law of the country is our constitution. And the constitution actually deals with this particular situation in what is called Article 12 of the Constitution. Now, the Article 12 has many sub-articles, but Article 12 generally deals with what we refer to as equality before the law. All citizens, all persons, not just citizens, all persons are to be treated equally before the law. And sub-article 3 in particular says that no person shall be, on the grounds of race, religion, language, caste, sex, or any of such grounds, be subject to any disability, liability, restriction, or condition with regard to access to shops, public restaurants, hotels, places of public entertainment, and places of public worship of his own religion.
That's Article 12, subsection 3 of the Constitution of Sri Lanka.
Article 3 of Sri Lanka says that no person should be discriminated on any ground, whether it be race, color, etc., in gaining access to shops and hotels and places of public entertainment, or even places of public worship of that person's religion. So this is very important. Now, so that is enshrined in the highest law of our land. Now, the question is, if somebody violates that, clearly you're acting unconstitutionally. If the government violates it, then there is a remedy in the Constitution which allows you to go to the Supreme Court and file what's called a fundamental rights application against the government, because the government is, or government-like agencies receiving large grants or funds from the government, those agencies, like the archaeological department at Sigiri, would be liable to a fundamental rights application if they discriminate against you. So this lady, for example, if she didn't call the minister and was not allowed to go in on the basis that she should, that they are US citizens or some other country citizens.
They were Sri Lankans, actually. Yeah.
And discriminated against, they would, under Article 12.3, be able to file a fundamental rights case and get compensation. And perhaps an order on the government to let them through. They will be entitled to do that. The question, though, is whether this also refers not just to government places, it refers to hotels. Hotels are not run by government places. Places of entertainment, concerts, etc. are not run by government. They're run by private people.
Absolutely.
What is the remedy if a private person acts unconstitutionally?
Similar to what Dr. Gamini Singha and his wife underwent, according to the viral information.
Remedy then would probably not be initially in the Supreme Court, because it's not an executive or government action. You may have to file what's called a action for declaration and maybe compensation in the district court to enforce that as a general right. But then the district court, which hears the parties after, all the parties have filed their side of the story, we call those pleadings, may be obliged to then refer the matter to the Supreme Court, because it involves a fundamental right for determination.
I see.
So that is the remedy. It's a bit more, circuitous route to the Supreme Court, but that would be your remedy.
Right.
There are also other laws and regulations dealing with eating houses, what in the law are called eating houses. There is a standard model regulations for urban councils, standard model regulations for municipal councils to adopt, and many of them have adopted these. And there are rules dealing with eating houses. But I looked through those, and they don't say anything in particular about discriminating against guests. It doesn't. They should. I think those should be amended to include such provisions in keeping with what's in the Constitution. They don't. However, there is also another law called the Tourist Board Act, which establishes the Tourist Board. And the Tourist Board gives licenses to tourist hotels and classifies them as, 1-star, 2-star, 3-star. And as part of that, they have issued, and it's on their website, a notice which clearly says that they will not tolerate, discrimination on the basis of what you are seeing. And that should a hotel do that, they will look into the possibility of cancelling their license.
So would a complaint to the tourism board be
relevant? If you are discriminated against at a tourist hotel, not necessarily at a wayside hotel or restaurant, but at a hotel, then you should definitely, in addition to taking a video or going to the police, you can also write and complain to the tourist board. And you must have evidence that this happened. So, try to video it or something. But you can complain to the tourist board, and hopefully they will hold an inquiry and then, take the necessary action against the hotel company. Hotels are not supposed to, discriminate against anybody, let alone Sri Lankan citizens.
Absolutely. So that information should be on the tourism board website.
It is on the website, and it's a big notice. If you Google it, you should be able to retrieve it.
Now that's really useful information. We started off with a concert in Sri Lanka, then I just asked you about what you're going to do after the 15th of this month, or June, and we led to this whole thing about double standards for Sri Lankans in Sri Lanka, in foreign established restaurants and hotels and so on. Right, and I think it's important that from the point of view of the tourist board also to send out an active circular to all of these establishments as well, reminding them that these doors are open to everyone, every paying customer. Because I can understand if customers try to come in and not pay, or they come intoxicated, etc., then any establishment has the right to refuse patrons at the door. But here, these are genuine customers. They look very different to their majority tourist foreign clients or customers. That's what it is. So.
Now, there might always be situations in which somebody tries to cheat the system, etc. But then you have to deal with that individual. You can't, there's an old saying that, because of one bug, all the bugs in the chair will be killed, You can't adopt that attitude here, because if that is the case, just because one person steals, then you have to assume everybody is a thief. You can't do that. There is also what is called the presumption of innocence, which is that when a citizen comes and says, I am a citizen, you must presume and assume that person is honestly telling you the truth, unless you have some cogent evidence beyond just asking or an accent in a language, or the person can't speak the language. That is not adequate to show that the person is not a Sri Lankan citizen. Now you have dual citizenship in Sri Lanka, and there are many, many Sri Lankans and their children and their grandchildren who may be dual citizens but just don't speak the language at all. And have grown up in other countries, but they are nevertheless citizens. So you can't, just on the basis of language alone, come to the conclusion that they are not citizens. It doesn't displace the presumption of innocence. But talking about tourism, there are other ways also in which we get discriminated. One example again in Sigiri is I was with a foreign, several of my foreign colleagues who were visiting, and I'm very proud to show my country, so I drove them into Sigiri, and there's an entrance which says that you can go in there. It's close to the Sigiri rock. So we drove in there. We were stopped at the gate, and the officer there tells me that, your friends can go this way, but you as a Sri Lankan citizen, you have to go around and buy your ticket at the beginning of the pleasure gardens and walk all the way through the pleasure gardens up the rock, while these my friends can now walk up the rock immediately. There's a special parking place for foreign tourists in Sigiri. Right. Dedicated only to foreign tourists. This is being done by the Central Cultural Fund, which is a government entity. Now, when this happened 10, 15 years ago, when I was practicing law in Sri Lanka, I wrote to the Cultural Triangle and the Archaeology Commissioner, because when I tried to go that way, I was stopped. And in front of me, a tourist bus was allowed in. I wrote to them and I said, if you do not remove this rule, I'm going to file a fundamental rights case against you. And I got an immediate response. Within a week, I got a response. They must have consulted the attorney saying, we are very sorry. This has been a misunderstanding on the part of the officer on the ground. They put the entire blame on that poor officer on the ground and said, there is no such rule. You can go there. This is perfect. We apologize. And so we are going to give new instructions so that they are very clear. This was 15 years ago. But they haven't, because the same practice is continuing even today. When I was there like 2-3 months ago, in Lanka, that is the situation. So this is illegal conduct. You cannot separate out. Sri Lankans should be able to buy, anybody should be able to buy their tickets in any place. You can't say this is for one side and this is for another side, unless they're equal. If they're equal, that's fine. But actually, Sri Lankans have to walk a much longer distance in order to access Sigiri than foreign tourists. So this is favoritism, really. It is clear, undoubtable favoritism by a government agency. So that's a fundamental rights case. So that's one example. The other example where I actually filed the case was again with two musical colleagues who traveled from the US. Again, very proud to show the country, so I took them up. I went to Horton Plains, and that's a national park run by the Department of Wildlife. And there you have to pay, I think they had to pay 1,500 rupees or something to enter, and I had to pay 50, 100 rupees as a
small amount of money.
Small amount. So I bought the tickets and I told him I'm buying this under protest. Anyway, we went, we saw the place. We came down to the Botanic Gardens in Kandy. Same thing. 300 rupees or something for them, much higher, and then a smaller amount for me. Again, I said I'm buying it under protest. And what was really, really sad is then I went to the Gagaladeniya temple. And there we went into, there was nobody in the temple. It was an early morning. I parked the car. We all went in, the three of us. This gentleman and his wife and myself, and we observed the beauty of the temple. We, venerated the place. We paid our respects. They are not even Buddhists, but, they were very respectful. And then while we were inside the temple, a young boy, an Aditya, comes along and says, sir, me denna ticket ekak ganna one.
Right, because they were foreigners.
Yes. So I said, mona nitiyak yatade what law is that? He said, loku hamdru kiyala tiyena.
The big priest.
Chief priest has told me to sell it. So then I said, okay, anyway, I will pay it as a donation, I said, and it was some small amount, 10, 15 rupees, but anyway, I paid the money, he issued the ticket, and then we looked over, and when we came out, and there's a large, like a grounds in which you had to walk down to the gate. As we started walking down from the temple to the gate, I could see the chief priest with his hands on his hips and a whole bunch of men, hulking men, standing around him near the gate and now looking at us. So I got quite worried actually as to why. I thought maybe, then I gave the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe they are, considering some landscaping or something like that. And then we continued to walk down. And as we approached the gate and this group of people and the chief priest asked me, "Me mahatyada me ticket ekak ganna bae kiwwe." Is this the gentleman who refused to buy a ticket? He asked this little Aditya who was there. And he said, yes. So then he said, why did you refuse to buy a ticket? So I said, because it's illegal. In Sigiri, I said, Niti Virodhi visa. And then he started having an argument with me. Then I told my two friends, you proceed, you go to the car and wait in the car. I didn't want them to get involved. No. And we ended up having an argument. Then he called me in to his kutia, to his
chamber.
To temple home. And he sat behind a very large desk with all these men surrounded now. Really quite a very intimidating situation. And he continued to argue and saying, we are also born out of the mother's womb, of a human being's womb. We also have anger. So then I told him, but as a priest, you're supposed to temper it and to keep calm in these situations. That's Buddhist teaching, isn't it? And so anyway, we had an argument, and I told him, under the Buddhist Temporalities Ordinance, you have no right to collect fees unless it has been duly gazetted and placed before Parliament. That is the rule. And you have not done that, and therefore collecting fees. If the churches in Europe can collect fees from tourists, why can't we do it? I said, maybe you can, but you haven't gone through the right process.
That's the process.
And I said, anyway, I have the tickets. I'll meet you in court. And I turned around and walked out, and thankfully nobody followed me. And I got in the car and left. Anyway, I filed a case, having come back to Sri Lanka.
You did?
I did. I filed a case in the Court of Appeal. For a writ of mandamus, because what I discovered when I came back, I didn't include the priest, by the way, though I did file those papers and spoke about that event. I didn't bring the priest into them because the Court of Appeals writ, what is called judicial review, only applies to the government, not a private, temple like this. But I did cite the Director of Wildlife Conservation and the Minister, as well as the Minister for Botanical Gardens and the Director of the Botanical Gardens as the respondents to the case. And what I discovered in the research I did was that under those laws, under the Wildlife Protection Ordinance and under the Botanic Gardens Ordinance, you have to gazette, the Minister has to gazette the fees that can be collected from the public. And those fees have to be then placed before Parliament and approved by Parliament. That's the principle, old British principle of no taxation without representation. Collection of fees, whether they be as taxes or fees or anything like that, is technically taxes. And you need to go to Parliament and get approval. No representation without, no taxation without representation. So same principle. I filed this case and I asked for orders of the government to, what I discovered was that the last gazetted fees were in the 1950s. Something like 25 cents for Sri Lankan, 1 rupee and 50 cents for foreigners. And so what I told the court was, all fees collected since that date, since they have not been gazetted or placed before Parliament, have been collected illegally. I want a mandamus on the government to return to all the people you have collected over and above the illegally collected fees for the last 10, 15, 20 years. And so anyway, the state, the Attorney General did file responses, and it went to argument, and the argument, they came to a settlement and agreed to gazette the fees for these two. And I said, and my second ground of challenge was, you can charge what I call differential fees for foreigners. But one institution charges 300% more. Another institution is charging 500% more. There is no basis for this. There is no basis. I said the government must have a rational basis. If it is the fact that this is the income tax differential, which foreigners don't pay and we do, then there must be a basis for that. Or if it is the facilities that you're providing for them, there needs to be a rationalization of and justification for that differential. You haven't done that. So we need to see that as well. So anyway, the state did do that. They gazetted it and placed it before Parliament. So for those two at least. But again, I see that fees have been raised in both these places, subsequent. Whether those were placed before Parliament and gazetted, we didn't. So that is really a lack of fiscal discipline.
This is the thing. And also monitoring and following and monitoring the due process of the law. I think that's something that where we all fail as a country, because I'm sure you will agree with me. We have all the necessary laws, the bylaws, regulations to run a smooth functioning country. Not just the old British legislation that we have brought forward, but also since independence, we have brought in huge amounts of Sri Lankan laws and regulations, more than sufficient to run the place. The problem, I think, is the implementation and monitoring it. Lalanath, as ever, it's a wonderful, fascinating conversation that we've had today. I think time is going against us on this program. So let's conclude. Just remind me again when your concert is again.
It's on the 14th of June at 7 o'clock at the Lionel Wendt Theatre in Colombo.
And it's called?
It's a concert by the Gustav Mahler Orchestra of Colombo, conducted by Sri Veerasinghe, and there are 2 items on the program, my Sigiri Symphony and Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 3. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Talk to you later. Thank you. Goodbye.